The moment the poor woman walked into the billionaire's party wearing a torn dress and dusty slippers, laughter exploded across the hall. Some guests pointed at her, others pulled out their phones to film her. Security rushed toward her. Then the billionaire stopped the music, walked straight to her, took her hand, and said into the microphone, "Everyone here was invited by my staff. She is the only person I invited myself." The whole hall went silent. Then he said something that nobody in that room would ever forget. But to understand why the richest man in the city was holding the hand of a woman in rags, you must go back. Back to the dusty market, the burned stall, the cold prison cell, and the terrible secret that tied this poor woman and this billionaire together for 10 long years. Her name was Zuri. His name was Obina Nwafor, and their story began 10 years before this night, in a place far from any golden hall. Zuri was not always a woman people laughed at, but in the crowded market of Ogui, in the busy city of Enugu, life had beaten her down until she had almost nothing left. Every morning before the sun came up, she carried her small tray of akara and groundnuts to the roadside, set it on 3 old blocks, and prayed that today people would buy. She was young, still under 30, with a soft face and tired eyes. Her wrapper was faded and patched in 2 places, but she always kept it clean. She greeted every customer with a smile, even the ones who counted their coins twice and still walked away. At home, in one small rented room with a leaking roof, her younger sister Ayo lay sick on a thin mattress, coughing through the night. The medicine cost money Zuri did not have, so she woke. She fried her akara, she smiled, and she carried the weight of 2 lives on her thin shoulders. And that morning she had no idea that her hardest day was only just beginning. That morning, a shiny black Jeep rolled into the market and stopped right in front of Zuri's little stall. The window came down, and out looked Nkem Eze, one of the richest and proudest women in the whole city. She wrinkled her nose as if the air itself had gone bad. "Move this dirty tray from my front. How can I park my good car near this poverty?" Zuri bent low with respect, because that is how she was raised, and she begged softly, "Madame, please, this is the only spot I have." But Nkem only laughed. She stepped down from her Jeep in her golden shoes, and with the tip of her foot, she kicked over the tray. The akara scattered into the gutter. The groundnuts rolled into the dust. The whole market turned to watch. Some people laughed. Zuri went down on her knees in the dirt, trying to save what little she could. "Next time," Nkem said, brushing her hands, "know your place." And as the crowd whispered, nobody there could have imagined that this same cruel woman would one day kneel and beg Zuri for mercy. As Zuri knelt there gathering her ruined goods, most people simply walked past, shaking their heads. In the market, everybody had their own troubles, and a poor widow's shame was nothing new to them. The gossip started before she even stood up. "That is the widow Tunde threw out of her own husband's house," one woman whispered. "They say she carries bad luck. First her husband dies, now look at her." Zuri heard every word, but she said nothing. She had learned that answering gossip only fed it and made it grow. But then one man crossed the road towards her. His name was Jelani, a kind fruit seller who had a stall near hers. He knelt down beside her in the dust and began helping her pick up the scattered groundnuts without a single word. "Do not mind them, my sister. God sees everything. The proud ones always fall in the end." For the first time that day, Zuri felt a small warmth in her chest. She did not know that Jelani's simple kindness was about to open a door she never expected. That same afternoon, when the market had grown quiet, a tall man in a clean suit walked slowly between the stalls. He was not buying anything. He was looking at faces, asking careful questions. His name was Kofi, and he worked for a very powerful man. He stopped at Jelani's fruit stall and asked, "Please, do you know a woman around here? She would be a widow now, kind-hearted. Her name is Zuri." Jelani's mouth opened in surprise, and his eyes moved toward Zuri's empty spot, for she had already gone home to her sister. But before he could answer, another voice cut in. It was one of Nkem's errand boys who had been sent to listen and report.
"There is no such woman here," the boy lied quickly. "Nobody by that name in this market." Kofi frowned, thanked them, and walked away disappointed once more. Jelani wanted to call the man back, but the crowd swallowed the stranger in the suit. And just like that, the one person searching for Zuri had stood 10 steps away from finding her and lost her again. To understand Zuri's pain, you must know how she fell so very low. Only 2 years before, she had been a happy wife. Her husband, a gentle bus driver named Emeka, loved her with his whole heart. They were not rich, but they had a small house he had built with his own 2 hands, block by block on the edge of town. They had dreams. They wanted children. But then, one rainy night, Emeka's bus slid off the wet road, and he never came home again. Zuri's world broke into pieces. She had barely finished crying when the vultures came. And the worst vulture of all were the face of family. Emeka's elder brother, Tunde, a loud man with greedy eyes, arrived just 3 days after the burial. He did not come to comfort her. He came to count what his dead brother had left behind. And as he walked slowly through the small house, touching the walls, Zuri saw something in his eyes that turned her cold with fear. Tunde called a family meeting, the kind that decides a widow's whole fate. He sat in the best chair with the elders he had bought with drinks and money, and he spoke as if Zuri were not even in the room. "A woman cannot hold a man's property," he declared loudly. "This house belongs to the family now. She has no son to keep it. Let her go back to her own people." Zuri begged. She reminded them that Emeka built the house for her with his own hands, that he would have wanted her to stay in it. But the elders looked away, and the weight of family pressure crushed her like a heavy stone. In their custom, a widow without a son had little power to argue with the men. Tunde changed the locks that very evening. He threw Zuri's few belongings out into the yard and told her to take her sick sister and disappear. "You came into this family with nothing," he sneered, "so you will leave with nothing." That night, Zuri and Ayo slept under the open sky by the roadside. But Zuri wiped her tears and made herself a quiet promise that she meant to keep. Zuri promised that she would survive no matter what it cost her. She would not let the world break her, and she would not let Ayo die. So she found the one small room she could afford, with its leaking roof and cracked floor, and she started her life again from nothing. She borrowed a little money from Jelani to buy beans and oil, and she began frying akara by the roadside every morning. It was hard, back-breaking work. Her hands burned from the hot oil. Some days she made just enough for one meal, which she always gave to Ayo first. Her sister's cough was getting worse, a deep and frightening sound that shook her small body all night. The doctor at the clinic said Ayo needed a special treatment that cost more money than Zuri could ever dream of. Every night, Zuri counted her small coins, and every night the number was too small. But she kept smiling, kept frying, kept praying. And then, one ordinary afternoon, a customer said something that lit a tiny flame of hope inside her. An older woman who bought akara from Zuri every morning stopped one day and looked at her with pity and respect. "My daughter," she said, "you are too hard-working to suffer like this. A big madame in the rich part of town is looking for a house help. The pay is very good, enough to treat a sick person and more." She pressed a small paper with an address into her hand. Zuri's heart jumped in her chest. Good pay could mean medicine for Ayo. It could mean a real roof, real food, a real chance at life. That night, she could hardly sleep from the hope of it. In the morning, she washed her best wrapper, plaited Ayo's hair, and told her sister to be strong because everything was about to change for them. She walked all the way across the city to the rich neighborhood, past the tall gates and the flowers and the shining cars, and she knocked on a great iron gate. But the woman who owned that house was not the answer to her prayers. She was the beginning of a much deeper nightmare. The madame of the house was called Adana, a woman with a sweet face and a cold, cold heart. She looked Zuri up and down like someone inspecting goods at the market. "You are thin, but thin people work harder.
You will start today." The pay she named was indeed good, and Zuri almost wept with gratitude right there. She thanked Adana again and again, calling her my savior. For the first few weeks, Zuri worked like 10 women put together. She woke at 4 in the morning and slept near midnight. She cooked, cleaned, washed, and scrubbed until her fingers cracked and bled. She sent money home for Io's medicine, and for the first time in months, her sister's terrible cough began to ease. Zuri began to believe that God had finally remembered her. But Adana was watching her closely, and not with kindness. Behind that sweet smile, a plan was slowly forming. Because Adana was a close friend of Enkem Eze, the proud woman from the market, and Enkem had already begun asking sharp questions about this new househelp called Zuri. One evening, Adana threw a big party in her house for all her rich friends, and she ordered Zuri to serve the guests. Zuri moved quietly among them, carrying trays of drinks, keeping her eyes down. But then she heard a voice she knew far too well. It was Enkem Eze, sitting like a queen among the guests. Enkem's eyes locked onto Zuri, and a cruel smile spread slowly across her face. "Ah," she announced to the whole room, "so the gutter akara seller is now a common house girl. See how the mighty have fallen." The guests laughed. Enkem took a glass from Zuri's tray and then, staring straight into her eyes, poured the drink slowly onto the clean floor. "Clean it," she ordered, "on your knees. That is what you were born to do." Zuri's hands shook with shame, but she thought of Io's medicine, and she knelt. She wiped the floor while the rich people laughed above her head. But as she knelt there, she did not know that Enkem's cruelty that night was not by accident. It was the start of a plan to destroy her completely. Here is what Zuri did not know. For many months, Enkem Eze had been chasing the heart of the richest man in the whole city, Obina Nwafor. She wanted to be his wife, to sit beside him and share his great fortune. But Enkem had stumbled on a dangerous secret. She had overheard Obina telling his aide Kofi that he could never marry until he found a certain woman, a woman who had saved his life long ago when he was nothing but a poor beggar. The woman's name, he said, was Zuri. When Enkem first heard that same name at Adana's party, her blood ran cold in her veins. Could this dirty house girl truly be the same Zuri that Obina had searched for over 10 long years? If it was true, then this poor widow stood between Enkem and everything she wanted in life. So Enkem made a wicked decision. She would bury Zuri so deep in shame and trouble that no man, rich or poor, would ever want to find her or lift her up. And she had the money and the friends to make it happen fast. Enkem's money moved like poison through the city. First, she made sure the clinic treating Io suddenly refused the girl, claiming the bills were unpaid, even though Zuri had paid every single coin. Io's cough came roaring back worse than before, and Zuri could not understand why the doctors had turned their backs on them. Then Enkem whispered lies into Adana's ear. "That house girl is a thief. I have heard it from many people. Watch her closely, or she will empty your whole house." Adana, who was already cold, became truly cruel. She cut Zuri's pay in half and blamed her for everything that went wrong under that roof. When a plate broke, it was Zuri's fault. The other workers, afraid for their own jobs, began to avoid her like a sickness. Zuri felt the whole world turning against her for no reason she could see. She wept at night, holding her coughing sister, asking God what she had done to deserve so much suffering. But the cruelest blow of all had not yet fallen. The cruelest moment came on a bright Sunday morning. Adana announced that her most expensive gold necklace, a gift worth more than Zuri could earn in 5 whole years, had gone missing from her room. The house exploded into chaos. Adana screamed and pointed her finger straight at Zuri. "It is you! I always knew you were a dirty thief!" Zuri fell to her knees, crying out that she was innocent, that she had never touched anything that wasn't her own. But then Adana marched to Zuri's corner, reached under her thin mattress, and pulled out the shining gold necklace for everyone to see. Zuri's mouth fell open in horror. She had never seen that necklace before in her life. Someone had placed it there. She looked around the room, and for 1 second she caught the small, satisfied smile of the other worker, a girl she now understood had been paid by Nkem. "I am innocent," she screamed. "I was set up. Please believe me." But nobody was listening to her. Adana had already sent for the police, and the sound of that siren would haunt Zuri for the rest of her life. The police came, and they did not come gently. They dragged Zuri out of the house by her thin arms, while the neighbors gathered to watch and whisper. "Thief," they murmured, and she looked so quiet, too. You could never trust these poor ones. Zuri screamed that her sick sister was alone at home with no one to care for her, but the officers only laughed and pushed her into their van. At the station, they threw her into a cold, dark cell that smelled of fear and dirt. They did not ask her side of the story even once. Adana was rich, and Nkem's money had already whispered to the right people. Zuri sat on the cold floor in the darkness, her wrapper torn, her body aching from rough hands, her heart shattered into dust. She thought of Io, coughing alone in that room, waiting for a sister who could not come. She had lost her husband, her home, her business, her good name, and now her freedom. She had nothing left to lose. Or so she believed. But in the darkness of that cell, her rescue was already quietly on its way. For 3 long days, Zuri sat in that cell, eating nothing, sleeping little, whispering Io's name like a prayer. She had given up all hope that anyone would come for her. But then, on the 3rd day, a guard banged hard on the bars. "Zuri," he barked, "someone has come for you. Your bail has been paid." Zuri lifted her head slowly, sure she had heard him wrong. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. "I have no one in this world." But the guard unlocked the cell and pulled her to her feet. In the front office stood a tall, well-dressed man she had never seen before. It was Kofi, the very same man who had once searched for her in the market. He looked at her tired, dirty face with gentle eyes, and he bowed his head with deep respect, the kind of respect no one had shown her in years. "Madame Zuri," he said softly, "my master has been looking for you for a very long time." And Zuri's heart began to pound, for she had no idea who this master could be. Kofi had never once stopped searching for Zuri, not in all those years. His master had ordered him to turn over every stone in the city until he found the woman with that name. And 3 days before, a police contact mentioned a strange case, a quiet housegirl named Zuri, arrested for a theft she swore she did not commit. The very moment Kofi heard the name and the description, his heart leaped in his chest. He rushed to the station, paid the bail, and hired the best lawyer in the city to clear her name. Within a day, the truth came out fully. The paid worker confessed under pressure that she had planted the necklace herself. Zuri was free, and her record was clean at last. But she was confused beyond all words. "Please," she begged Kofi as he drove her home to Io, "who is your master? Why would a rich man care about a poor woman like me? I know no powerful people." Kofi only smiled kindly and said, "You knew him once, madam, when he was not powerful at all." And Zuri's mind flew back through the years, searching for a face she had almost forgotten. 10 years ago, Zuri was a young girl of 18, selling oranges in that same market to help her poor parents. One rainy evening, as she was packing up her things, she found a young man collapsed in the mud behind her stall. He was burning with fever, his clothes soaked and torn, his body robbed of everything he had owned. People walked past him as if he were rubbish on the ground. Some of them even laughed. But Zuri could not walk past a dying man. She was only a girl with almost nothing herself, but she had a very big heart. She carried him step by painful step to her family's tiny room. For 3 whole weeks she nursed him. She fed him from her own plate. And when his fever would not break and the medicine man demanded money, Zuri did something she never told a single soul. She sold the only thing of value she owned, her late mother's gold earrings, and she used that money to save a stranger's life. When at last the young man grew strong again, he wept at her kindness and swore he would never forget her. His name was Obina. Before Obina left to chase his dreams in the big city, he held Zuri's 2 hands and made her a solemn promise. "One day," he said, "I will come back for you. Whatever I become in this life, I owe it all to you. You saw me when the whole world looked away and laughed." Then he was gone, and the years swallowed them both. Obina worked like a man possessed by a dream.
He started with nothing, selling spare parts. Then he owned a small shop, then a company, then many companies, until his name meant money and power across the entire city. But no matter how rich he became, he never once forgot the poor girl who sold her mother's earrings for him. He sent Kofi to find her again and again. But by then, Zuri's parents had died. She had married a Mecca and moved away, and her life had been tossed by so many storms that she seemed to simply vanish. And every time Kofi got close to her trail, someone with money made sure it went cold. That someone, in these last few months, had been Kem. But now, at long last, Obina knew exactly where his savior was. When Kofi told Obina that he had finally found Zuri and that she had been thrown in a cell for a crime she did not commit, the billionaire's calm face filled with a quiet, cold fury. "So this is how the world repaid her kindness," he said softly. He wanted to see her, but he also wanted the whole city to see her, to honor the very woman they had all stepped over and laughed at. He was hosting a grand party that very weekend, the biggest event of the year, and so instead of sending a servant with a card, Obina did something he had never done for anyone before. He wrote the invitation with his own hand, and he even drove to Zuri's small room himself to deliver it, though she was not home when he came. Kofi placed the golden card in her hands the next day. "My master invites you personally," he said with a bow. Zuri stared at the beautiful card, trembling all over. She could not understand why a billionaire would want a poor widow at his grand party. And across the city, Nkem heard the news and flew into a terrible rage. The news spread through the market like fire through dry grass. "The Akara widow invited the billionaire," people whispered everywhere. Some did not believe it. Some laughed and said she would be turned away at the gate. Even Zuri herself was deeply afraid. "I have nothing good to wear," she told Jelani. "They will only laugh at me there. Perhaps I should not go at all." But Jelani took her hands in his and said, "My sister, a man like that does not invite a woman by his own hand for nothing. Go, hold your head up high. Whatever happens, God is with you." So Zuri decided that she would go, in her cleanest wrapper, poor as she was. But Nkem was not going to allow it quietly. When she heard that Zuri had received a personal invitation, she understood at once that her secret was about to explode in her face. She rushed to Adana, and together the 2 women made a final wicked plan. They would make sure that when Zuri walked into that party, she would be humiliated so badly that Obina would be ashamed to ever know her. They did not know the truth had already outrun them. On the night of the party, the great hall glittered like heaven itself. Hundreds of the richest people in the city arrived in shining cars and golden clothes. Among them were the very people who had crushed Zuri into the dust. There was Nkem, dressed like a queen, quietly whispering to the guests that a dirty madwoman might try to enter and disturb them. There was Adana, her cruel employer, laughing loudly over her champagne glass. And there, in an expensive agbada he could barely afford, was Tunde, her greedy brother-in-law, who had wormed his way in to rub shoulders with the rich. They only knew that the great Obina Unwafor was about to make an important announcement, and they all wanted to be near his money when he did. Then the tall doors opened, and a hush fell over the room, followed quickly by a wave of cruel laughter.
because walking into that hall of gold and diamonds was a thin woman in a torn dress and dusty slippers. It was Zuri, and every enemy she had ever known was there in that room to watch her. The laughter grew louder and crueler by the second. Some guests pointed openly, others pulled out their phones to film the poor woman as if she were a common street joke. Security men in black suits moved quickly to drag her out before she could embarrass their great master. Zuri's courage nearly failed her completely, and she wanted to turn and run. But then the music suddenly stopped. Obina Nwafor rose from his seat at the front of the hall. With one raised hand, he froze every single guard in place. The whole room went silent as he walked, slow and calm, straight towards the trembling woman in rags. He took her rough hand gently in his, as if she were made of pure gold, and he lifted a microphone to his lips. "Everyone here tonight was invited by my staff," he said, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the room. "But this woman, whom you are all laughing at, is the only person I invited myself." 300 faces froze in shock, and Nkem's glass slipped in her hand. And then Obina began to say the words that would turn that whole room upside down.
10 years ago, Obina began, I was dying in the mud of a market, robbed of everything, sick and completely alone. Rich people, exactly like all of you, walked past me and laughed. The hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop to the floor. Only one person in this whole world stopped for me, a poor young girl who had almost nothing. She carried me home on her own back. She fed me from her own plate. And when I needed medicine to live, she sold the last precious thing she owned in this world, her dead mother's gold earrings, to save the life of a stranger who could give her nothing in return. Obina's eyes filled with tears as he turned to look at Zuri. From his pocket, he drew out a small old cloth and slowly unwrapped it. Inside were the very gold earrings she had sold 10 years before. He had searched for years and bought them back. "This," he said, his strong voice breaking, "is that girl. Her name is Zuri. She is the reason I am alive, and you dared to laugh at her." But Obina was not finished yet. His calm eyes turned cold as ice as they moved slowly across the room. "And now," he said, "let me show all of you who these fine laughing people truly are underneath." He called Kofi forward, who held a thick folder full of hard proof. One by one, the truth came pouring out. First, Adana, the cruel madam who had falsely accused Zuri of theft and thrown her into a cell for a crime she never committed. The paid worker's written confession was read aloud, and Adana's face turned gray as the guests gasped in shock. Next, Tunde, the brother-in-law who had stolen a widow's house and thrown a sick girl out into the street, all against his own dead brother's dying wishes. The elders in the room turned their backs on him in disgust. And finally, the mastermind of it all. Obina held up phone records and secret payments that led straight to one single woman, Nkem Eze, who paid people to destroy this innocent woman simply because she stood in the way of what you wanted. The whole hall turned to stare at Nkem, and her proud, queenly smile finally shattered into 1,000 pieces. Nkem tried to run for the doors, but they were all blocked by his men. She fell to her knees right there on the shining marble floor, the very same way she had once forced Zuri to kneel in the market dust. "Please," she cried out, "forgive me, I beg you. I was blinded by jealousy." But the police that Obina had quietly invited were already stepping forward from the shadows. Nkem, Adana, and the corrupt officers who had taken the bribes were all arrested that very night in front of everyone they had tried so hard to impress.
Tunde was thrown out of the party in total disgrace, and the word spread so fast that by morning the whole city knew he was a man who robbed helpless widows. Everything they had built on cruelty came crashing down in a single night. And through it all, Zuri simply stood there, quiet, as 10 long years of pain and injustice finally turned into justice before her eyes. She had not lifted a single finger for revenge. She had only been kind long ago, and that kindness had returned to save her. But the greatest surprise of the whole night was still waiting for her. When the noise of the arrests finally died down, Obina turned back to Zuri, and his hard face grew soft and gentle once again. "Your sister, Io," he said quietly, "is already at the best hospital in the whole country. My people took her there this very morning. The doctors say she will make a full and complete recovery. You will never worry about her health again." Zuri's legs gave way beneath her, and she wept, but this time they were tears of pure joy. All the fear she had carried for so many years lifted from her shoulders at last. Obina took off his own fine jacket and placed it gently around her trembling shoulders, covering her torn dress. Then he turned to the whole hall and said in a loud voice, "Tonight you will not remember me, you will remember her. Stand up now and honor the woman who taught me what real wealth truly is." And slowly, one by one, 300 rich and powerful people who had laughed at a poor widow rose to their feet and clapped for her. But Obina still had one more thing to say, and this time he would say it only to her. Later that night, when all the guests had gone home and the great hall was finally quiet, Obina and Zuri sat together on a wide balcony that looked out over the sleeping city. For a long moment, neither of them spoke a word. Then Obina said softly, "For 10 years I told myself I was only searching for you to repay an old debt. But that was a lie I told my own heart." Zuri looked at him, surprised by his words. "The truth," he went on gently, "is that I have never met another woman with a heart like yours in all my life. Rich women smiled at my money, but you, a girl with nothing at all, gave everything you had for a stranger who could offer you nothing back. How could I ever forget a soul like that one?" Zuri's cheeks grew warm, and for the first time in years, she felt something soft and new stir inside her chest. And now the most respected man in the city was looking at her as if she were the only person alive. She lowered her eyes shyly and whispered, "I only did what was right." Obina did not rush her because he was a patient and gentle man by nature. He knew that Zuri had been hurt far too many times to ever trust quickly again. So he simply stayed near her in the weeks that followed. He helped her nurse young Ao back to full and laughing health. He built a proper business for her, a real shop with her name on it, so that she would never have to depend on any man to eat again. He never once made her feel small or owned or bought. And slowly, like a flower opening after a long and heavy rain, Zuri's wounded heart began to trust again. She saw that his kindness was not a trap, that his eyes held no greed, only care for her. One evening, many months later, Obina took her hand and asked her softly to be his wife, not as a poor woman rescued by a rich man, but as an equal who had once saved him first. And Zuri, standing on her own 2 feet, with her own money and her own good name, said yes because she truly wanted to. Their wedding was not the loudest the city had ever seen, but it was the one that people talked about for many years afterward. Zuri wore her late mother's gold earrings, the very ones Obina had searched for and bought back for her, shining once more where they truly belonged. Ao,
now healthy and laughing, stood proudly beside her sister as she married the man they had once saved together so long ago. The same market women who had watched Nkem kick over her akara tray now watched Zuri ride through the streets like a true queen, and this time their whispers were only of wonder. Nkem, Adana, and Tunde spent long, hard years paying for their cruelty, forgotten by the very society they had tried so desperately to impress. But Zuri herself never once became proud. She built a home for widows who were thrown out just as she had been, and she fed the poor from her own hand, always remembering the girl who sold her earrings for a stranger. Because in the end, the storyteller says, wealth is not the money in your hand, it is the kindness in your heart. And kindness, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home.